I was 59 when the flood came for my street and swallowed my house like a careless child gulping water. I had been boiling lentils, humming an old church hymn. When the radio crackled with warnings, I'd heard all hurricane season, but never believed. And by the time the first wave slipped under the door and the second slammed the porch furniture into the hydrangeas, I was knee-deep in brown water, grabbing the photo tin and my prescription bag and the cardigan my mother knitted in 1983. Before I tell the rest, make sure you're subscribed and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I love knowing where these stories travel. My name is Lila, and I thought after losing my husband to a winter heart attack and my father to a slow, forgetful summer, that sorrow had already planted all its flags in me. But it turns out, grief keeps an extra suitcase. When the water receded, it left my living room draped in river silt and my piano mute under a skin of mud. And the adjuster with cheerful eyebrows said words like depreciation and act of God and partial payout, while I nodded as if my ears were doors he could close gently behind him. And I went to my son Jonah's house with a grocery bag of clean underwear and wet photographs fanned like playing cards. And he hugged me, the quick kind people give in parking lots, then glanced toward the staircase where Nora was, rocking their new baby, and said that with the nursery renovations and Nora's anxiety, it might be better for me to find a place of my own, which is a terrible sentence when you have just watched your place float past like a coffin. I used the last bars on my phone to search extended stay motels and slept 3 nights to the soundtrack of arguing strangers and ice machine coughs, eating crackers in bed and telling myself it was temporary. Lila, everything is temporary. Even this ache in your chest that keeps mistaking itself for a bird. On the 4th morning, I remembered a number I had not dialed in 38 years because pride is a magician who keeps the best tricks for last. My high school rival, my almost love, my once-upon-a-time piano partner in duets and mischief, Theo Marrow, whose laugh used to skid down the corridor and make teachers sigh. We had chosen sensible lives back then, he in New York with scholarships and fast music, me in Carolina with a plain gold ring and a job at the library. But a postcard arrived every few Christmases with a skyline and a scribble, still playing. Yingti, as if he were proof that some versions of us don't die. They moved to different cities. I called, expecting a receptionist, a dial tone, punishment, but instead I got the tired velvet of his voice saying, "This is Theo." And I could say nothing for 5 seconds, because memory doesn't walk into a room, it removes the ceiling. I told him about the water and the ruined photographs and the way Jonah studied the baby monitor instead of my face. And he said, "Stay where you are," as if I'd been sprinting for years and he was holding a finish tape. And 2 hours later, a car too clean for my street pulled up. And he stepped out grayer at the temples, but still wearing the kind of smile that rearranges weather. He didn't ask for the polite details people use to protect themselves from other people's pain. He lifted my suitcase like a treasure chest, and he let me cry into his coat, the wool swallowing my apologies like bread swallows soup. And when I tried to say, "I'm fine, really," "It's just a lot," he said. "Good, then let it be a lot." And there is something medicinal in being granted permission to be exactly as broken as you are. His apartment was an old mill loft converted into light, the kind of place that makes even silence echo in a friendly way. And the first night we ate eggs on toast because grief makes you crave breakfast at all hours. And he asked about the library patrons I used to nickname after their favorite sections and whether I still arranged my spice rack alphabetically. And I asked about the stages he'd played and the hands he had held and lost. And he said big cities don't make loneliness smaller. They make it louder. By the end of that week, I was folding his dish towels as if they were origami swans, leaving small notes on his piano about the way the morning sun turned the keys into a runway for moths. And he was labeling my pillbox because the flood had washed the calendar right out of me. Then Nora texted in brisk sentences that pretended to be concerned. How was I managing? Had I contacted FEMA, perhaps we could contribute toward a deposit at a nice little studio near the hospital so they could swing by with the baby sometimes. Which meant please locate yourself at a distance that can be bridged by short visits and never a crisis. I wrote back a thank you long enough to hide my refusal inside it, and immediately felt both wicked and free, like cutting off hair you were only ever growing for other people. Theo had a way of watching me that made time behave, slower around the tea kettle, faster around the sad parts. And one Sunday he took me to the community center where he taught music to kids whose parents were too busy performing survival to pay for lessons. And he put a sheet of simple chords in front of me and said, "Your turn." And I told him the old wrist didn't arc like it used to, and he said, "We're not here for arcs." And the 10-year-old beside me clapped in triplets whenever I found the right note, and I thought, perhaps this is what mercy sounds like when it wears sneakers. Somewhere in that month, Jonah's tone changed the way weather does when it remembers it has obligations. He left a voicemail saying he'd been thinking, maybe I could stay the holidays, maybe we rushed the decision. And I understood that people sometimes mistake shame for generosity. So I told him gently that I was safe and working on next steps, and he said, "With who?" And I said, "A friend," and he said, "Mom, you don't know people who can help." And I said, "Son, then you don't know me." And after we hung up, I sat on Theo's piano bench and laughed one of those laughs that opens a new room in your chest. The insurance check arrived, half of what a life costs, and everyone told me it was practical to rent a small place and stack plastic bins like nesting dolls. But practicality is a ladder nailed to the wrong wall. So I did something the younger me would have envied, and the middle-aged me would have called foolish. I took a part-time job at the community center library, moved the rest of my life into 2 soft suitcases, and stayed. Staying doesn't have fireworks. It has grocery lists and 2 mugs hanging like punctuation marks on a hook, and evenings when you practice not apologizing for taking up space on a couch you partly own. One rainy Thursday, Theo came home with a cardboard box and said, "Open it after dinner," in the tone of a boy who has smuggled summer into winter. And inside was a used upright with more scars than I have. Rescued from a shuttered ballroom, its wood the color of stories told around a campfire, and he had already tuned it so softly the first C sounded like a held breath. The next weeks became a long improvisation. Laundry harmonies, soup variations. The choreography of 2 people learning which parts of their loneliness are compatible like puzzle edges. And late one night, while thunder rehearsed outside and the city rubbed sleep from its eyes, he asked, "What if we make this official?" And I thought of vows like scaffolding you put around the building you intend to live in while you keep repairing it. And I said yes by moving my cardigan to his closet and my toothbrush to his cup. And yes, again, a month later, when we signed papers at a cheerful city clerk behind a plastic fern. And yes, every morning since to the small work of co-constructing days. I wish I could tell you Jonah learned quickly, but lessons that matter often don't. So it took time. An ER visit for the baby's asthma where I sat beside Nora and showed her how to time the inhaler puffs. A snow day where I cooked stew and watched Jonah accidentally see me as someone useful. A long conversation where I told him about the poverty of being tolerated and the wealth of being chosen. And one afternoon, standing by Theo's rescued piano, Jonah hugged me with both arms and said, "I'm sorry I measured you against our schedule." And I said it was okay, and it wasn't. And both could be true, and we started from there. Sometimes I drive past the old street where my porch used to yawn like a friend, and I see the watermarks tattooed on brick. And I think of all the ways life corrects our maps with a thick black pen. And back at the loft, Theo will be practicing pieces that sound like rain teaching steel to sing. And I'll be cataloging donated books that still smell like other people's rooms. And the kids will tumble in with cheeks beaming and ask for the loud songs. And we'll give them chords big enough to climb. If you've listened this far, tell me where you're from in the comments and whether you believe in second beginnings. I didn't, until the river wrote mine for me. And if you feel moved to support more stories, your kindness keeps this little corner of the internet lit. As for me, I keep the photograph tin on a shelf above the rescued piano and the cardigan folded near the door for luck. And every night before sleep, I touch the upright's wood and whisper thank you to the version of Lila who dialed a number her pride told her to forget. Because sometimes the house you lose is the price you pay for discovering the home that was waiting inside you all along. And sometimes the person who opens the door doesn't need to say anything clever at all. Only, "You're safe here," which is really another way of saying, "Welcome back."